The train wheezed to a stop at Granger Station, its steam hissing like whispered secrets in the Texas heat. Among the usual cargo of cattle feed and dry goods, something unexpected waited on the platformer, specially built cart with leather straps and wooden wheels, designed for someone who would never walk again. Lila Mae Walker sat motionless in that contraption, her once pristine traveling dress now dusty from the long journey, her hands folded with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned to hide her trembling. She had been beautiful once, before the fire took everything: her dowry, her legs, her future husband's promises. Now she was just another broken thing being shipped west, answering a mail-order bride advertisement out of pure desperation. What she didn't know was that the man waiting for her hadn't written that ad at all, and what he was about to offer her would change everything she thought she knew about love, dignity, and what it meant to be whole. But would a woman who had lost everything be brave enough to risk her heart one more time? The morning sun cast long shadows across the platform as Lila Mae Walker waited, her fingers worrying the worn fabric of her traveling dress. 3 months ago, she had been the belle of Charleston society, her dance card always full, her future as certain as the sunrise. The Whitmore plantation had been her destination then, marriage to Charles her golden promise. But fire has a way of burning more than wood, and flesh it consumes dreams too. She remembered the night that changed everything with crystalline clarity. The servants' quarters had caught first, the flames licking up the dry timber like hungry tongues. She had run toward the screaming, toward the heat, because that was who Lila Mae Walker was, someone who ran toward trouble, not away from it. The beam that crushed her spine had also crushed her future, at least the one she had imagined. Charles had visited once in the hospital, his face pale with something she now recognized as revulsion mixed with social obligation. The engagement had been quietly dissolved, her dowry redirected to cover medical expenses, and her family's whispered conversations had grown more frequent behind closed doors. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like Providence when her cousin Martha showed it to her. Rancher seeks companionate wife, character more important than circumstances. Write to W. Graves, Granger Station, Texas. She had written immediately, pouring her heart onto paper with all the honesty her southern upbringing would allow. Her paralysis, her lost fortune, her desperate need for a place in the world she had hidden nothing, expecting rejection but hoping for mercy. Now, as the train's steam dissipated in the morning heat, she wondered if mercy wore a human face. Weston Graves stood at the far end of the platform, his hat pulled low, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something lasting with his own 2 hands. The Rocking G Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime Texas grazing land, but it hadn't been handed to him on a silver platter. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every board of his ranch house represented back-breaking work and calculated risk. He wore his late wife's wedding ring on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt where it rested against his heart like a secret. Sarah had been gone 3 years now, taken by the same fever that had nearly claimed their daughter Emma. The house had grown too quiet since then, too empty, despite the presence of his 7-year-old girl, who seemed to fade a little more each day. His sister Margaret had meant well, he knew that. But when he had discovered the advertisement she had placed in newspapers from Charleston to Atlanta, he had been furious enough to ride into town and tear it down with his own hands. 2 late responses had already begun arriving, including one that had made him pause with its raw honesty and gentle dignity. "Papa?" Emma's voice was soft beside him, barely audible above the settling sounds of the train. She stood close enough to touch, but maintained the careful distance she had cultivated since her mother's death, as if proximity to love inevitably led to loss. Her dark hair was braided neatly, her small hands clutching a rag doll that had seen better days. "What is it, sweetheart? Is she really going to live with us?" Weston looked down at his daughter, seeing Sarah's eyes staring back at him with that mixture of hope and wariness that had become Emma's permanent expression. "I don't know yet." We'll see what she wants to do." The station master was already moving toward the special cart, his movements efficient but respectful. Weston had paid him extra to ensure the transfer would be handled with dignity, and he could see the man taking care with the wooden ramps and leather supports. As he approached, Weston's first impression was of stillness, not the stillness of resignation, but of someone who had learned to hold herself with careful grace. Lila Mae Walker was beautiful, though not in the way society pages might describe. Her beauty was quieter now, tempered by suffering and refined by adversity. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that held both strength and vulnerability in equal measure. "Miss Walker?" His voice was gentle, respectful. "I'm Weston Graves." She looked up then, and he saw intelligence in her green eyes, along with something that surprised him, a spark of defiance that suffering hadn't quite extinguished. "Mr. Graves, I received your letter." Her voice carried the soft drawl of the Deep South, cultured but not pretentious. "I need to be honest with you, Miss Walker. I didn't place that advertisement. My sister Margaret took it upon herself to meddle in affairs that weren't her concern." He saw her face tighten, fear flickering across her features. "But I did read your letter, and I wrote back because what you said about character mattering more than circumstances that struck me as truth." Lila's hands tightened on the arms of her cart. She had prepared herself for many possibilities, but not this. "I see. And now?" Weston removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "Now I'm hoping you'll let me offer you something different than what you came here expecting. Not charity, not pity, but partnership. My ranch needs someone with your education and good sense. My daughter needs someone who understands what it means to keep going when the world tells you to give up. And he paused, choosing his words carefully. I need someone who sees value in what we're building here, not just what they can get from it." Emma stepped forward then, her curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Are you really going to teach me like Papa said? Mama used to teach me letters, but she got too sick." Lila looked at the little girl, seeing the careful way she held herself, the protective distance even in her approach. Recognition passed between them, the recognition of loss, of learning to be careful with hope. "What's your doll's name?" she asked, instead of answering directly. "Rosie. Mama made her for me before." Emma's voice trailed off. "She's beautiful. I can see your mama put a lot of love into making her." Lila's voice was warm, genuine. "I had a doll once named Cordelia. She had the most ridiculous frilly dress, but I loved her anyway." "What happened to her?" "She was lost in a fire, along with most everything else I owned. Sometimes we lose things we love, don't we? But that doesn't mean we stop loving them." Emma nodded solemnly, and Weston felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of worry he had carried since Sarah's death. "Miss Walker," he said quietly, "my offer stands. You can have your own room in the house, meals with our family, and honest work helping manage the ranch books and teaching Emma. In return, you'll have a home and a share in what we build together. Not as my wife, that's not what either of us came here for, despite what that advertisement might have suggested, but as a partner in making something good." Lila studied his face, looking for deception or false kindness, but finding only honest intention. The relief was overwhelming. She had prepared herself for duty without love, for gratitude without dignity. This was something else entirely: respect, possibility, choice. "Mr. Graves, I accept your offer, and I think we should start by you calling me Lila Mae, if you're comfortable with that. Miss Walker sounds like someone I used to be." He smiled then, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Lila Mae, it is, and you should call me Weston. We're going to be working together after all." As they made their way from the station to his wagon, specially modified with a ramp and secure seating, Lila Mae felt something she hadn't experienced in month anticipation for tomorrow. The future was still uncertain, still fragile, but it was hers to help shape. And that, she thought as the Texas landscape opened up before them, was worth more than all the dowries and dance cards in Charleston. Emma chattered softly as they drove, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the ranch, her reserve gradually melting in the face of Leela May's attentive listening. Weston drove in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing back to ensure his passengers were secure, but mostly thinking about the strange turn his carefully ordered life had taken. None of them could have imagined that this beginning, born from deception and necessity, would grow into something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, love, and what it meant to be whole. 3 days into a new life at the Rocking G Ranch, Leela May was beginning to believe that perhaps Providence had a kinder face than she had dared hope. The morning routine had settled into something almost comfortable: breakfast with Weston and Emma, followed by lessons in the sunny front room, while Weston tended to the cattle. The ranch house was modest but well built, with wide hallways that accommodated her cart, and a ramp Weston had constructed leading to the front porch. She was reviewing Emma's arithmetic when Margaret Graves arrived in a flurry of dust and guilt, her horse lathered from a hard ride from town. Margaret was a handsome woman of 42, unmarried by choice and unapologetic about it, with the same strong jaw as her brother and eyes that held more determination than wisdom. "Weston," she called from the yard, her voice carrying that particular note of urgency that made Emma look up from her slate with worried eyes. Leela May maneuvered her cart to the window, watching as Weston emerged from the barn, his face immediately tightening at the sight of his sister's distress. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the conversation in their postures, Margaret's animated gestures, Weston's growing stillness. The way his shoulders set in a line, she was beginning to recognize as his preparation for trouble. When they approached the house together, Margaret's face was flushed with something that looked like panic mixed with defiance. She stopped short when she saw Leela May through the open doorway, guilt flickering across her features before being replaced by determined cheerfulness. "You must be Leela May," Margaret said, climbing the porch steps with false brightness. "I'm Margaret Graves, Weston's sister. I've been so eager to meet you." "Mrs. Graves," Leela May replied carefully, noting the way Weston hung back, his jaw set in hard lines. "How kind of you to call." "It's Miss Graves, actually. Never found a man worth the trouble of changing my name for." Margaret's laugh was too loud, too forced. "Weston, perhaps you could show me that new foal you were telling me about." "I think we'd better come inside," Weston said quietly. "Emma, why don't you go play with Rosie in your room for a while?" Emma's eyes darted between the adults, reading the tension with the acute perception children develop when their world has already been shaken once. "But we weren't finished with my numbers." "We'll finish them later, sweetheart," Leela May said gently. "Go on now." When Emma had reluctantly disappeared down the hallway, Margaret sat heavily in one of the parlor chairs, her hands twisting in her lap. Weston remained standing, his arms crossed, while Leela May positioned her cart where she could see both of them clearly. "Margaret," Weston's voice held a warning. "Whatever you came to tell us, just say it plain." "I received a letter yesterday," Margaret began, then stopped, her courage failing. "From someone in Charleston. Someone asking questions about Leela May." The words hit like cold water. Leela May felt her chest tighten, old fears rising like floodwater. "What kind of questions?" Margaret pulled a crumpled envelope from her reticule, her hands shaking slightly. "A Mr. Charles Whitmore. He said he was her intended husband and that she had left Charleston under difficult circumstances. He wanted to know if she had contacted anyone in Texas, if anyone had answered her letters." The silence stretched taut as a wire. Leela May's face had gone very pale, but her voice remained steady. "And what did you tell him?" "I didn't answer. I came straight here instead." Margaret looked between them, her guilt written plainly on her face. "But there's more. I have to tell you both something, and I should have told you from the beginning." Weston's eyes narrowed. "Margaret, I wrote those responses to Leela May's letter myself." The words came out in a rush. "You never saw her original letter, Weston. I intercepted it along with 6 others. I wrote back as you, and I've been carrying on the entire correspondence." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Leela May felt the world shift beneath her, all the careful hope she had built crumbling like sand. "You mean none of it was real?" The things he wrote about character mattering more than circumstances, about building something together. The sentiments were real, Margaret said desperately. Everything I wrote, I believed Weston would feel if he just met you. I know my brother, and I knew. You knew nothing. Weston's voice was low, dangerous. You took it upon yourself to deceive a woman who had already been through enough, and you used my name to do it. Lila May's hands gripped the arms of her cart until her knuckles went white. The betrayal was complete, perfect in its cruelty. She had thought herself past the point where hope could wound her, but Margaret's deception cut deeper than Charles's abandonment because it had felt so genuine, so respectful of her dignity. "I see," she said quietly. "So I am here under entirely false pretenses. You brought me across the country based on lies." "Not lies," Margaret protested. "I genuinely believed. You believed you had the right to manipulate both of us for your own purposes." Lila May's southern breeding kept her voice level, but ice ran underneath the words. "You turned my desperation into your entertainment. That's not fair. I was trying to help." "Help?" Weston's anger was building like thunder. "You forged correspondence. You brought a woman here under false promises. And now her past is following her because of your meddling." He turned to Lila May, his face stricken. "And you shared your heart with someone you thought was me, but who was really her." The humiliation was complete. Lila May had poured her truth onto paper, her fears, her hopes, her desperate need for a place to belong, and it had all been read by a stranger who had played games with her suffering. She had been so careful in Charleston to maintain her dignity even in ruin, but here she had been stripped bare by kindness that wasn't even real. "I need to leave," she said simply. "Today." "Where will you go?" Weston asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice, despite everything. "I don't know. Back to Charleston, perhaps. Face whatever Mr. Whitmore wants to say to me directly instead of letting him hunt me like a fugitive." "You can't travel alone, not with that man looking for you," Margaret said, rising from her chair. "Lila May, please, let me explain why I did this." "I don't want your explanations." Lila May's voice was tired now, the fight going out of her. "I want to understand what Mr. Whitmore wants, and then I want to disappear somewhere where well-meaning people can't find me to fix my life for me." She began maneuvering her cart toward the door, but Weston stepped in front of her. "Wait. Just wait." When she looked up at him, she saw something in his face that made her pause. Not pity, not obligation, but something fiercer. "Margaret was wrong to deceive you. Wrong to forge those letters, and wrong to manipulate us both. But she wasn't wrong about one thing, everything she wrote about character mattering more than circumstances, about building something together, about respect and partnership. Those aren't just pretty words to me. But you never chose them. She chose them for you." "No," he said quietly. "I'm choosing them now. I'm choosing to ask you to stay, not because my sister arranged it or because you answered some advertisement, but because in 3 days you've brought more life into this house than we've had in 3 years. Because Emma smiled at breakfast this morning for the first time since her mother died. Because you've already started organizing my books and they make sense for the first time ever." He knelt beside her cart, putting them at eye level. "And because whatever Charles Whitmore wants with you, you shouldn't have to face it alone." Lila May studied his face, looking for the deception she had learned to expect, but finding only sincerity. "You don't owe me anything, Weston. Your sister's manipulations don't create obligations for you. This isn't about obligation. This is about choice. My choice to ask you to stay and help us build something good here. Your choice to trust that some offers of partnership are genuine, even if they don't come wrapped in pretty letters." Margaret watched them both, her guilt warring with hope. "Lila May, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you both. But I also know what I see when you're together, when you're working with Emma. I may have brought you here under false pretenses, but what you've built in 3 days is real." Before Lila May could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, still clutching Rosie. "Are you leaving?" she asked in a small voice. I heard raised voices, and Mama always left when there were raised voices. The simple question broke something open in the room. Lila May looked at the little girl who had already been abandoned by death, now facing abandonment by choice, and felt her resolve waver. I don't know yet, sweetheart. Some things have gotten complicated. Most things are complicated, Emma said with the wisdom of a child who had learned too early that life was unpredictable. Mama always said the simple thing was just to love people and let them love you back. In the silence that followed, Lila May made her choice. Not because of Margaret's manipulations or Weston's kindness or even her own desperation, but because a 7-year-old girl needed to learn that not everyone leaves. Mr. Whitmore can write his letters and ask his questions, she said finally, but he'll have to come here if he wants answers. I'm not running anymore. Weston's smile was slow and genuine. Then we'll face whatever comes together. Margaret's relief was palpable, but Lila May held up a hand. I'm staying, but not because of anything you did. I'm staying despite it. And if you ever meddle in my life again, Margaret Graves, I will make you regret it in ways your imagination can't encompass. Understood, Margaret said meekly. As the tension finally began to ease, none of them could have predicted that Charles Whitmore's interest in Lila May's whereabouts was about far more than a discarded engagement, or that the letters he was writing had less to do with love than with law, and the complex matter of inheritance that made a paralyzed woman in Texas suddenly very valuable indeed. The morning after Margaret's revelation, Lila May woke before dawn with the determined air of a woman who had decided to make herself indispensable. If she was going to stay at the Rocking G, Ranch Truly Stay, not as a guest or charity case, but as a contributing member of the household, then she needed to prove her worth beyond any doubt. She found Emma in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast with the solemn concentration of a child who had taken on too many adult responsibilities too young. The coffee was bitter enough to strip paint, the biscuits were burned on the bottom and raw in the middle, and there were eggshells in the scrambled eggs. "Good morning, sweetheart," Lila May said gently, maneuvering her cart close to the stove. "That smells adventurous." Emma's lower lip trembled slightly. "I wanted to help Papa. He's been doing everything since Mama died, and he gets so tired." "What a thoughtful daughter you are. But you know what? I think breakfast might be more fun if we did it together. Would you like me to teach you some tricks my cook back in Charleston showed me?" Relief flooded Emma's face. "Yes, please. I don't want Papa to eat burned food anymore." They worked side by side, Lila May coaching Emma through the process of making proper biscuits, showing her how to crack eggs cleanly, explaining the mysteries of coffee that didn't taste like bitter water. The easy companionship felt natural, comfortable in a way that surprised them both. When Weston came in from the early chores, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, Emma chattering happily as she stirred batter under Lila May's patient guidance, the kitchen warm with the smell of successful cooking, sunlight streaming through windows that someone had thought to open. It was the first time in 3 years that the morning had felt like more than just another day to survive. "Something smells different," he said, settling at the table with genuine curiosity. "Emma made breakfast," Lila May said, giving the little girl full credit. "I just offered a few suggestions." Emma beamed as she served perfectly golden biscuits alongside eggs that were actually edible. "Lila May taught me the secret of making biscuits fluffy. You have to treat the dough gentle, not tough." "Wise advice for more than just biscuits," Weston said, meeting Lila May's eyes with a smile that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. After breakfast, they settled in the front room for Emma's lessons. Lila May had retrieved the child's primer book from a dusty shelf, along with a slate and chalk that showed signs of long disuse. Emma read haltingly but with determination, her finger tracing each word as if it might escape if she didn't hold it down. "Very good," Lila May encouraged, as Emma struggled through a passage about a farm family. "Now, what do you think happens next in the story?" "I don't know. Does the little girl find her lost lamb?" "What do you think? If you were writing the story, what would you have happen?" Emma considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court judge. I think, I think the lamb finds her way home by herself. Sometimes things come back when you're not looking for them anymore. The simple wisdom in the words made Lila May's chest tight. That's a beautiful way to end the story. Would you like to practice writing it down? They spent the morning working through letters and numbers, Emma's confidence growing with each small success. Lila May discovered that the child was bright, curious, and hungry for knowledge that had been neglected in the aftermath of grief. "Can you teach me about music too?" Emma asked as they finished their arithmetic. "Mama used to sing to me, but I'm forgetting the songs." "I'd be happy to teach you music, if your father doesn't mind. Do you still have your mother's songbooks?" Emma's face clouded. "Papa put them away after Mama died. He said music made the house too sad." Understanding passed between them, the way grief could turn joy into pain, how the things that once brought comfort could become unbearable reminders. "Well, perhaps we could start with some songs that are just ours, new songs for new memories." That afternoon, while Emma napped, Lila May asked Weston if she could review the ranch's account books. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of exposing the financial details of his operation to what was essentially still a stranger. "I know it seems presumptuous," she said, interpreting his reluctance correctly, "but I managed my father's household accounts for years before everything changed. I might be able to help organize things in a way that saves you time." Something in her tone, professional, confident, but not pushy, made him reconsider. He retrieved the leather-bound ledgers from his desk, setting them carefully on the kitchen table where she could reach them easily. "I'm afraid they're not very neat," he warned. "I'm better with cattle than with numbers." Lila May opened the first book and immediately understood his reluctance. The entries were sparse, many transactions recorded weeks after they occurred, and the overall organization was more hopeful than systematic. But beneath the chaos, she could see the bones of a profitable operation: cattle sales, equipment purchases, payroll for the ranch hands, seasonal expenses that followed predictable patterns. "May I ask you some questions as I work through these?" she said, "just to understand your system." For the next 2 hours, they worked together, Weston explaining his reasoning behind various expenditures, while Lila May began imposing order on the financial chaos. She asked good questions, practical ones that showed she understood ranching wasn't just about cattle, but about land management, weather patterns, market timing, and the dozen other variables that could make or break a season. "You bought this bull at premium price," she noted, pointing to an entry from 6 months earlier. "That seems expensive for breeding stock." "Angus bloodline," Weston explained. "The calves from him will bring twice the price of regular stock. It's an investment in future herds." She nodded, making a note. "So the higher initial cost pays off over multiple breeding seasons. That's smart, long-term thinking." Her approval meant more to him than it should have. Most people looked at ranching as simple work: buy cattle, graze them, sell them, without understanding the complex calculations that went into every decision. That she grasped the subtleties immediately spoke to an intelligence that had been trained on more than just social graces. By evening, she had reorganized the most recent 6 months of records, creating categories that made sense and identifying several areas where small changes could yield significant savings. More importantly, she had begun to understand the rhythm and scope of the Rocking G Ranch, the seasonal cycles that governed their lives, the careful balance between risk and reward that defined every successful operation. "This is impressive work," Weston said as she showed him the reorganized ledger. "You've made more sense of my records in 1 afternoon than I managed in 6 months. "It's satisfying work," she admitted. "I hadn't realized how much I missed having something meaningful to contribute." That evening, as they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma curled up between them with Rosie in her lap. The little girl was fighting sleep, her head nodding as she listened to the adults' quiet conversation about ranch plans and Emma's education. "Lila May?" Emma's voice was drowsy but determined. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you going to be my new mama?" The question hung in the evening air like a held breath. Leela May felt Weston's stillness beside her, the sudden tension in his posture. "I'm going to be your friend," she said carefully, "and your teacher, and someone who cares about you very much. Is that enough for now?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I think so. I liked having a mama, but I like having a friend too. Friends don't leave because they get sick." The simple statement revealed so much about the fears this child carried, the careful way she protected her heart from further loss. Leela May reached out and smoothed Emma's hair with gentle fingers. "Friends don't leave, you're right about that. Friends stick around and help each other, even when things get difficult." As they carried a sleepy Emma inside and tucked her into bed, Leela May felt something settling into place. Note, the desperate gratitude of someone accepting charity, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who was building something worthwhile. She was needed here, truly needed, and that made all the difference in the world. Later, as she settled into her own room for the night, she found herself thinking not about Charles Whitmore and whatever trouble he might bring, but about tomorrow's lessons with Emma, about the ranch ledgers that still needed organizing, about the songs she might teach, and the small ways she was already making this house feel more like a home. For the first time since the fire, she fell asleep, planning for the future, instead of mourning the past. 2 weeks had passed since Margaret's confession, and Leela May had settled into the rhythm of ranch life with a determination that impressed even the most skeptical of Weston's hired hands. She rose early each morning to help Emma with breakfast, spent the morning hours teaching lessons that ranged from arithmetic to geography, and devoted her afternoons to the ranch ledgers that had become her particular domain. It was while reviewing the books for the 3rd time that she discovered the discrepancies. At first, she thought she had made an error. The numbers simply didn't add up correctly. Feed costs were recorded at prices that seemed inflated, and several large cattle sales showed proceeds that were lower than market value would suggest. She checked her calculations twice, then a 3rd time, before accepting the uncomfortable truth. Someone had been systematically skimming money from the Rocking G ranch. She found Weston in the barn, examining a mare's swollen hock with the gentle thoroughness that characterized everything he did. The afternoon light filtered through the open doors, catching the silver threads that had begun to appear at his temples, and for a moment she simply watched him work, appreciating the competent way he handled the nervous animal. "Weston?" She had learned to announce herself when approaching the horses. Sudden sounds from an unexpected direction could spook them, and a spooked horse was dangerous for everyone involved. He looked up from his examination, his face lighting with the smile that had become familiar over the past weeks. "Leela May, how are the books treating you today? That's what I need to discuss with you. Could we talk privately?" Something in her tone made him straighten, his attention sharpening. "Of course. Let me just finish here." He ran his hands down the mare's leg one more time, checking for heat or swelling, then patted her neck reassuringly. "Easy, girl. Just a bruise. Nothing that won't heal." They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, a pattern they had developed over the weeks of working together. Emma was napping, the house quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock and the distant lowing of cattle in the far pasture. Leela May had laid out the ledgers on the kitchen table, along with several pages of calculations in her neat handwriting. "I need you to look at these entries and tell me if the amounts seem correct to you." Weston settled across from her, his brow furrowing as he studied the figures she indicated. "This feed purchase. I remember this order, but I'm sure Jensen quoted me $8 per ton, not 12. And this cattle sale to the Morrison outfit? We got top dollar for those steers, 15 head at $42 each." He paused, his jaw tightening as he did the mental arithmetic. "That's $630, not the $470 recorded here. I'm afraid there are several more discrepancies like these. Someone has been doctoring your books, Weston, inflating expenses and underreporting income." The silence stretched between them as the implications sank in. Theft was serious business in Texas, but theft by someone with access to the ranch records meant betrayal by someone close, someone trusted. "How much?" His voice was carefully controlled. Based on what I can verify from the past year alone, approximately $1,500. But I suspect it goes back further than that. $1,500 was nearly half a year's profit for a ranch the size of the Rocking G. It was money that could have gone toward improvements, toward Emma's future, toward the financial security that meant the difference between prosperity and mere survival. Who has access to these books? You, obviously. Margaret, when she comes to visit. Your foreman, Jake Peterson. And she hesitated, not wanting to voice the suspicion that was growing in her mind. And any of the hands who might be able to read and write well enough to alter the entries. But Weston, these changes are sophisticated. Whoever did this understands bookkeeping well enough to make the alterations look natural. Before he could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the kitchen window, they could see Jake Peterson riding up with two of the ranch hands, their faces grim in a way that suggested more trouble. "Boss," Jake called as they dismounted. "We found 3 head down by Miller's Creek. Shot." Weston was on his feet immediately, his face darkening. "Shot? Not sick?" "Clean rifle shots, all 3. Someone wanted to make sure we'd find them and know it wasn't accident or disease." Lila May watched the exchange with growing unease. 3 cattle killed deliberately was more than simple rustling. It was a message, a threat meant to intimidate or warn. Any sign of who might have done it? Horse tracks leading back toward the county road, but the ground's too hard to make out much detail. Could be anyone with a grudge or a reason to cause trouble. After Jake and the hands left to deal with the dead cattle, Weston returned to the kitchen with the weight of too many problems settling on his shoulders. The financial theft was bad enough, but combined with deliberate vandalism, it suggested a pattern of trouble that went beyond simple criminal opportunity. Could these things be connected? Lila May asked quietly. The altered books and the cattle killing? Maybe. Someone trying to weaken the ranch from multiple directions. He ran his hands through his hair. A gesture she had learned indicated deep worry. Or someone trying to drive us to sell. Who would want you to sell? Several possibilities. Morrison's been making offers for our water rights for the past 2 years. There's talk of the railroad coming through, which would make certain parcels of land very valuable. Or it could be simple spite. I've had to let some hands go over the years, and not all of them left happy. Emma appeared in the doorway then, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair mussed from her nap. "Papa?" I heard loud voices again. Weston's expression immediately softened. "Just ranch business, sweetheart, nothing for you to worry about." But Emma was too perceptive to be easily dismissed. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The direct question caught both adults off guard. Children who had already experienced loss developed an acute sensitivity to threat, an ability to read danger in adult conversations and expressions. "Some people aren't very nice," Lila May said carefully, "but your papa is very good at protecting what's important to him, and we're all going to work together to make sure you're safe. Are you going to leave if the mean people come?" The question struck at the heart of Emma's deepest fear, that stress and trouble would drive away the adults she had learned to depend on. Lila May moved her cart closer to the little girl, taking her small hands in her own. "Emma, do you remember what I told you about friends? Friends don't leave." "That's right. Friends stick together when things get difficult, and you, my dear girl, are stuck with me whether you want to be or not." Emma's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I want to be stuck with you." That evening, after Emma was in bed, Weston and Lila May sat on the front porch planning their response to the day's revelations. The ranch books would need to be secured, locks changed, and access limited until they could identify the thief. The cattle killing would have to be reported to the sheriff, though both of them suspected that law enforcement would be more sympathetic than effective. "I want to ask you something," Weston said as the last light faded from the western sky. "And I want you to answer honestly, even if you think it might hurt my feelings." "Of course. Are you having second thoughts about staying here? Because if you are, I'd rather know now than have you feel trapped when things get more difficult." She studied his profile in the gathering dusk, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself ready for disappointment. This was a man who had learned not to expect promises to be kept, who protected himself by assuming loss was inevitable. Western, 3 weeks ago I had nothing, no home, no family, no purpose, no future worth mentioning. Today I have work that matters, a child who needs me, and, she paused, choosing her words carefully, and a partnership with a man I respect more than anyone I've ever known. Why would I give that up because some coward wants to shoot cattle and steal money? He turned to look at her then, something in his expression shifting. Partnership. Yes, we work well together, don't we? Our skills complement each other. Emma is thriving with both of us guiding her. The ranch is more profitable with proper bookkeeping. We make a good team. We do, he agreed quietly. Then, with the careful tone of a man testing uncertain ground, Lila May I ask you something personal? You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Back in Charleston, with your fiancé, did you love him? The question surprised her with its directness. I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of him, the security he represented, the future he promised, the way society approved of our match. I'm not sure I ever really knew Charles well enough to love the man himself. And when he left after your accident? I was hurt, certainly, humiliated, but not heartbroken, if that's what you're asking, more disappointed than devastated. Why did you tell me that? She considered the question, understanding that he was asking something deeper than the words suggested. Because I think you're wondering if I'm still carrying a torch for him. And because I think you should know that what we're building here isn't just me running away from something else. What are we building, Lila May? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither of them had been quite ready to name. She looked out over the land that was becoming familiar, thought about the little girl sleeping inside who called her friend, considered the man beside her who had offered her dignity when the world had offered her only pity. Something good, she said finally, something that belongs to all of us equally, something worth protecting. When he reached over and took her hand carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, Tosh didn't pull away. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, both of them thinking about the future they were building together and the challenges they would have to face to protect it. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above the house, or saw the way he turned his horse and rode back toward town with news that would set larger wheels in motion. The piano had been silent for 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Western knew this precisely because he had counted every one of them since Sarah's funeral. When the last notes of Amazing Grace had faded into the Texas dust and he had closed the instrument's lid with the finality of a coffin. The walnut upright had been Sarah's pride, shipped from St. Louis at considerable expense during their 2nd year of marriage, when cattle prices were high and the future seemed full of promise. Now it sat in the front parlor like an elegant gravestone, its surface covered with the accumulated dust of grief and Emma's forgotten music lessons. Lila May had noticed it on her first day. Of course it was impossible to miss, but she had respected the invisible barriers that grief builds around certain objects, certain memories, certain possibilities. Until Emma asked, "Why don't we ever use Mama's piano?" The question came during their morning lesson, as Emma practiced writing her letters on the slate. "You said you knew about music." Lila May glanced toward the parlor, where she could just see the corner of the instrument through the doorway. "That's your Mama's piano, sweetheart. Some things are too special to use every day. But Mama always said music was for sharing, not for keeping." Emma's voice held the matter-of-fact logic that children bring to adult complications. She said a piano that doesn't get played is just fancy furniture. The wisdom in the child's words struck deeper than Emma could have known. Lila May set down her own pen and really looked at the piano for the first time, seeing not just a dust-covered reminder of loss, but an instrument waiting to sing again. "Would you like me to ask your papa if we could clean it up?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Could we? Could you teach me the songs Mama used to play?" That afternoon, while Emma napped and Weston worked with the cattle in the far pasture, Lila May maneuvered her cart into the parlor and really examined the piano. The dust came away easily, with a damp cloth, revealing the rich walnut finish that had been Sarah's particular pride. The keys were yellowed but unwarped, and when she pressed middle C experimentally, the note rang true and sweet. She was halfway through cleaning the keyboard when Weston found her. "I came in for coffee and heard." He stopped in the doorway, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name. "I haven't heard that piano in 3 years. I hope you don't mind." Emma asked about it, and I thought perhaps it was time. Lila May's hands stilled on the keys, watching his face carefully. "If you'd rather I didn't." "No." The word came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "No, Sarah would have hated knowing it was just sitting here gathering dust. She always said music made a house feel alive." Emma mentioned that. She said her mama believed music was for sharing. Weston stepped into the room, his boots quiet on the worn rug. Sarah played every evening after supper, sometimes just for herself, sometimes she'd sing along. Emma used to sit right there on the bench beside her, trying to reach the pedals with her little feet. The image was so vivid, so full of warmth and normalcy, that Lila May could almost see the ghost of those happier evenings. What were her favorite songs? Hymns, mostly. "How Great Thou Art," "In the Sweet By and By." But she knew some Stephen Foster too, "Beautiful Dreamer," "Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair." Emma loved those best. His voice grew softer with remembering. After Emma was born, Sarah started making up little songs just for her. Silly things about farm animals and bedtime, and how much we loved our little girl. Those would be precious memories for Emma to have. I suppose they would. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the piano as if seeing it for the first time. I couldn't bear to hear it after Sarah died. Every note reminded me of what we'd lost. And now, he considered the question carefully. Now I think maybe I was so busy protecting myself from the pain that I was also protecting Emma from the joy. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. When Emma woke from her nap and discovered the cleaned piano, her delight was infectious. She climbed onto the bench with the reverence of someone approaching something sacred, her small fingers hovering over the keys without quite touching them. "Can you really teach me to play like Mama did?" "I can teach you to play like Emma does," Lila May said, settling her cart beside the bench. "Every person makes music in their own way. Your mama's music was hers, yours will be yours." The first lesson was simple, learning the names of the keys, understanding how the black and white keys worked together, feeling how different touches produced different sounds. Emma absorbed it all with the intense concentration she brought to everything important, her face serious with the weight of this connection to her mother's memory. "Can we play one of Mama's songs?" she asked after mastering the scale. What was her favorite? Emma thought carefully. "She used to sing Beautiful Dreamer when she tucked me into bed. She said it was about someone far away who was still loved." Lila May's fingers found the opening notes, the melody flowing from memory of countless evenings in Charleston drawing rooms. But as she played, she simplified the arrangement, making space for Emma's small hands to join in with the basic melody. "Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me, starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee." The sound filled the house like water filling an empty vessel. From the kitchen came the soft footsteps of Weston approaching, drawn by music that spoke of home and healing, rather than loss and longing. Emma's voice joined in, tentative at first, then stronger as she remembered her mother's bedtime ritual. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. When the song ended, the silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibility. Emma leaned against Lila May's shoulder with the trust of a child who had found something she thought was lost forever. "That sounded just like Mama used to play it." "That sounded like Emma learning to make her own music," Lila May corrected gently. "Your Mama would be so proud." From the doorway, Weston's voice was thick with emotion. "She would be, and she would have liked you very much, Lila May." The words created a bridge between past and present, between the woman who had been and the woman who was here now. Not replacement, but continuation. Not forgetting, but remembering in a new way. That evening, as they sat around the supper table, Emma chatted excitedly about her piano lesson, about the songs she wanted to learn, about the music that would fill their house again. The animation in her voice was something neither adult had heard since before Sarah's death. "Can we have music every day?" Emma asked, as Lila May helped her prepare for bed. "Would you like that?" "Yes, I think Mama would like it too. I think she gets lonely when the house is too quiet." Later, as Weston and Lila May sat on the front porch in their habitual evening peace, he brought up the afternoon's breakthrough. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving her back something I was too afraid to let her have. Music belongs to everyone who needs it. I just helped her remember that. It's more than that, and you know it." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You've brought life back into this house in ways I didn't know we needed. Emma's thriving. The ranch is more organized than it's ever been, and he paused, searching for words. "I find myself looking forward to tomorrow, in a way I haven't in years." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that made Lila May's heart speed up. "Weston, I know we said partnership," he continued quietly. "I know that's what we agreed on, but I need you to know that what I feel for you goes beyond respect and gratitude. You matter to me, Lila May, not just as Emma's teacher or the ranch bookkeeper, but as yourself, as the woman who brings music back into silent houses and makes broken things feel whole again." She studied his face in the lamplight, spilling from the windows, seeing sincerity and hope, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, and I know that wasn't part of our arrangement. And I know your past has given you reason to be careful with your heart. But I needed you to know, in case you might feel something similar." The honesty in his voice, the careful way he offered his heart without demanding anything in return, was so different from any declaration she had ever received. Charles had proclaimed his love like a conquest. Weston offered his like a gift. "I do feel something similar," she said softly. "I have for weeks now. I just wasn't sure if it was wise to let myself hope for more than partnership. And now," she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with a certainty that surprised them both. "Now I think maybe the best partnerships grow into something deeper when the people involved are brave enough to let them." When he kissed her, it was with the gentle reverence of a man who understood that some gifts are too precious to be taken lightly. The kiss tasted like possibility, and felt like coming home to a place she had never been but had always been searching for. From inside the house came the soft sound of Emma practicing her scales, the notes floating out into the Texas night like promises of all the music yet to be made, all the joy yet to be discovered, all the love yet to be shared in a house that was finally ready to be a home again. The land deed lay spread across Weston's desk, like a map of dreams made manifest. Lila May studied the careful survey lines and legal descriptions that defined the boundaries of the Rocking G Ranch, tracing with her finger the 15,000 acres that represented 12 years of backbreaking work, careful investment, and calculated risk. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, genuine awe in her voice as she read through the detailed history of land purchases that had gradually assembled the current holdings. "Started with 640 acres, and a loan that scared me senseless," Weston admitted, settling into the chair beside her. "Bought it from a man who was convinced the land was too dry and too far from the railroad to ever amount to much." "And was he right?" "About the railroad, yes. We're still 30 miles from the nearest line. But he was wrong about the water." Weston pointed to a section of the deed that marked several creek beds and 2 natural springs. "This land sits on one of the best aquifers in this part of Texas. Cattle can graze here year-round because the water never fails." Lila May understood the significance immediately. In a territory where water rights could make or break a ranching operation, Weston had built his future on the most fundamental necessity of all. That's why Morrison wants to buy your water rights. That's why Morrison will never get them. This water belongs to Emma's future and her children's future after that. The conversation had been prompted by Margaret's arrival that morning with news from town that had set them all on edge. A surveyor had been asking questions about property boundaries in their section, and a lawyer from Austin had been making inquiries about land titles and mineral rights. The activity suggested someone with significant resources was taking a serious interest in the area. "There's something else," Margaret had said, her face troubled. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store mentioned that someone was asking about you specifically, Lila May, a well-dressed gentleman who claimed to be a family friend from Charleston." The news had created a tension that hung over the house like storm clouds. Charles Whitmore's interest in Lila May's whereabouts was taking on a persistence that felt less like romantic pursuit and more like something darker. "I've been thinking about your former fiancé," Weston said now, rolling up the deed with careful precision. "His interest in finding you seems excessive for a man who abandoned you after your accident." "I've been thinking the same thing." Lila May's voice was troubled. "Charles never struck me as particularly sentimental. If he'd truly cared about me, he would have stayed when I needed him most. So why the sudden urgency to locate me now? Maybe something has changed in Charleston, some circumstance that makes your whereabouts important to him. Or makes me important to him in some way I don't understand." She paused, a troubling thought occurring to her. "Weston, what do you know about inheritance law, specifically regarding married women?" "Some." "Why?" "In South Carolina, a woman's property transfers to her husband upon marriage. But if the marriage is never formalized—" She trailed off, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "You think there might be an inheritance involved?" "My grandmother left me a small trust fund, nothing enormous but substantial enough. The terms were specific. It was to remain in my name until marriage, at which point it would transfer to my husband's control. But if I died unmarried, it would revert to the nearest male relative in my father's line." Weston's expression darkened as he followed her reasoning. "And if Charles could prove you were still legally engaged to him, he could claim the inheritance as my intended husband, or if something happened to me." She didn't finish the thought, but they both understood the implications. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the kitchen. "Papa, Lila May, come quick." They found Emma at the window, pointing excitedly toward the road where a cloud of dust announced approaching riders. As the figures became clearer, Weston's posture shifted into the alertness of a man preparing for trouble. "6 men," he said quietly, "riding hard and direct. That's not a social call." Lila May positioned her cart where she could see the approaching riders while remaining out of direct sight from the windows. "Do you recognize any of them?" "The one in front looks like Sheriff Coleman. Can't make out the others yet." When the riders arrived, Sheriff Coleman dismounted with the weary air of a man delivering bad news. He was a competent lawman, fair-minded but pragmatic, who understood that keeping the peace sometimes meant choosing the lesser of available evils. "Weston," he said, touching his hat brim respectfully, "sorry to bother you, but I need to speak with Miss Walker." "About what?" "Legal matter. Questions about her status and whereabouts. I've got some papers here that need to be served." Lila May appeared in the doorway, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Sheriff Coleman, I'm Lila May Walker. What can I do for you?" "Ma'am." Coleman removed his hat entirely, his respect genuine. "I've got a court order here requiring you to appear before Judge Harrison in Austin. Seems there's a question about your legal status regarding an engagement in South Carolina." "What kind of question?" "According to these papers, a Mr. Charles Whitmore claims you're still legally bound to marry him under South Carolina law, and that your departure from the state constitutes breach of a legal contract. He's asking the court to compel your return to Charleston to honor the agreement." The words hit like physical blows. Lila May felt the careful security she had built over the past month crumbling like sand. "Sheriff, I was never married to Mr. Whitmore. Our engagement was dissolved after my accident." "Ma'am, I'm just serving papers. The court will sort out the details." Coleman's voice was apologetic but firm. "You've got 2 weeks to appear before Judge Harrison, or he'll issue a warrant for your arrest as a fugitive from lawful obligation." Weston stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Sheriff, Miss Walker is a guest in my home and under my protection. If there are legal questions to be resolved, they can be resolved here in Texas, not in South Carolina. Weston, I understand your position, but this is a federal matter now. If she doesn't appear voluntarily, I'll have to bring her in." After the sheriff and his men left, the three of them sat in the kitchen, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. Emma had been sent to her room, but her worried face appeared periodically in the doorway as she tried to understand why the adults she depended on looked so frightened. "This is about more than just an engagement," Lila May said finally. "Charles is using the law to force me back to Charleston for reasons that have nothing to do with love or marriage." "The inheritance?" "It has to be. But I don't understand how he could make a legal claim stick. Our engagement was never formalized with a contract." Weston was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities and strategies. When he spoke, his voice held the determination of a man who had made a decision. "Then we'll go to Austin and fight this in court. We'll get a lawyer who understands both Texas and South Carolina law, and we'll prove that you're a free woman with the right to choose your own future. Weston, legal battles cost money, significant money. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. This ranch, this land, this life we're building, it's all meaningless if we can't protect the people who matter most." The simple declaration carried the weight of absolute commitment. Lila May felt tears threatening as she realized that for the first time in her life, someone was willing to fight for her, not because of what she could provide, but because of who she was. "There's something else we need to consider," she said quietly. "If Charles is this determined to get me back to Charleston, he might not limit himself to legal means." "What do you mean?" "I mean a man who would use false legal claims to kidnap a woman might also be willing to use more direct methods if the courts don't cooperate." The implication hung in the air between them that their peaceful life at the Rocking G Ranch was about to become something much more dangerous. But as Weston reached for her hand and Emma appeared in the doorway seeking reassurance, Lila May felt something she hadn't expected, not fear, but fierce determination. She had found her place in the world, found people worth fighting for, found love worth protecting. Charles Whitmore had made one crucial miscalculation. He was still thinking of her as the helpless woman he had abandoned in Charleston. He had no idea what the broken bride had become in the healing air of Texas, or how far she would go to protect the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. "Let him come," she said quietly, her voice carrying steel beneath the southern softness. "Let him try his legal tricks and his threats. He's about to discover that some things can't be taken by force, and some women refuse to be claimed like property." Weston's smile was fierce with pride and something deeper. "Then we'll stand together and show him what he's chosen to fight." Outside, the Texas sky stretched endless and free, and the wind carried the promise that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. Charles Whitmore arrived in Granger like a storm dressed in fine clothes. His carriage was polished mahogany with brass fittings, pulled by matched horses that cost more than most men made in a year. Everything about his appearance spoke of wealth, breeding, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. He was, Lila May had to admit as she watched from the parlor window, still handsome in the way that had once made Charleston mothers push their daughters forward at social gatherings. Tall, elegant, with prematurely silver hair that suggested distinguished maturity rather than age, he carried himself with the assurance of a man accustomed to getting his way through charm first, then pressure, then force if necessary. "That's him," she said quietly to Weston, who stood beside her, observing their uninvited guest. "Charles Whitmore." "He looks exactly like what I expected," Weston replied, his voice carrying undertones of distaste. "Money, arrogance, and the kind of softness that comes from never doing honest work." Charles had not come alone. 3 men accompanied him, not servants, but the sort of hard-faced individuals who solved problems that couldn't be resolved through legal channels. Their presence transformed what might have been a romantic gesture into something far more sinister. Emma pressed close to Lila May's side, her child's instinct sensing danger, even if she couldn't articulate its source. "I don't like those men." "Neither do I, sweetheart. Why don't you go to your room and play with Rosie while the adults talk?" "But what if they try to take you away?" The question cut straight to the heart of everyone's fears. Lila May knelt beside Emma's chair, meeting the little girl at eye level. "Emma, no one is going to take me away from you and your papa. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because I gave you my word that friends don't leave, and I always keep my word." Charles's knock was authoritative, demanding the knock of a man who expected immediate attention. Weston answered the door with the measured courtesy of someone who knew trouble when he saw it, but refused to show intimidation. "Mr. Whitmore, I presume. I'm Weston Graves." "Indeed, I've come for my fiancée." Charles's voice carried the cultured drawl of Charleston aristocracy, smooth as honey and just as calculated. "I believe you've been harboring Miss Walker under false pretenses." "Miss Walker is a guest in my home of her own free will. She's welcome to stay as long as she chooses." "I'm afraid that's not accurate." Charles produced a leather portfolio, extracting documents with theatrical precision. "These papers establish my legal claim to Miss Walker's person and property. Our engagement was never formally dissolved, making her departure from Charleston a violation of binding legal obligations." Lila May appeared in the doorway, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. Seeing Charles again, after months of healing, was like looking at a photograph of someone she had once known, but no longer recognized as important. "Hello, Charles. You're looking well." His smile was practiced, designed to charm and disarm. "My dear Lila May, you look rustic. This primitive life clearly disagrees with you." "On the contrary, this life suits me perfectly. Perhaps you've forgotten what real civilization looks like. I've come to take you home, where you belong. This is my home now. I belong here." Charles's expression hardened slightly, the charming mask slipping to reveal something colder underneath. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. Our engagement creates certain legal obligations that supersede your personal preferences." Weston stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Charles and Lila May. "What legal obligations? Miss Walker has explained that your engagement was dissolved after her accident." "Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, my dear fellow." Charles's smile turned predatory. "In South Carolina, an engagement announced publicly and sealed with the exchange of valuable consideration constitutes a binding contract. The engagement ring I gave Lila May was worth considerable sum, and accepting it created legal obligations that can only be dissolved through marriage or mutual written consent." "Which we never provided," Lila May said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Precisely. Your sudden departure was a breach of contract, and your cohabitation with this man." He gestured dismissively at Weston. "Well, that constitutes adultery against your lawful intended husband." The legal trap was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Under certain interpretations of South Carolina law, Lila May could indeed be considered legally bound to Charles until their engagement was formally dissolved. And if she was legally bound to him, then her relationship with Weston could be construed as adultery, giving Charles grounds to claim both her person and her property. "But there's more," Charles continued, clearly enjoying the revelation of his carefully constructed trap. "You see, my dear Lila May, your grandmother's will has been re-evaluated. It turns out the trust fund she left you is considerably larger than anyone realized. Property in Charleston has appreciated dramatically, and certain investments have matured quite profitably." "How much larger?" Lila May's voice was steady, but Weston could see the tension in her shoulders. "Approximately $50,000, a considerable fortune by any standard." Charles's smile was triumphant. "Of course, as your intended husband, I would naturally assume management of these assets upon our marriage." The true scope of his scheme became clear. This had never been about love or even wounded pride. Charles had discovered that Lila May was worth far more than anyone had realized, and he intended to claim her fortune through the legal technicality of their unresolved engagement. And if I refuse to return to Charleston with you, then I'll be forced to pursue more aggressive legal remedies. Kidnapping charges against Mr. Graves for harboring a woman legally bound to another man. Adultery charges against both of you. And of course, I'll have to petition the courts to seize your assets as abandoned property. One of Charles's companions shifted slightly, his hand moving closer to the gun at his hip. The message was clear legal coercion backed by the threat of physical force. "You seem to have thought of everything," Weston said quietly, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "I generally do. I didn't build my fortune by leaving important details to chance." Charles turned back to Lila May. "You have until tomorrow morning to gather your things. We'll be returning to Charleston immediately after that. And if she chooses to stay..." Charles's mask slipped entirely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Then you'll discover that Texas law has limited jurisdiction over South Carolina legal matters, and I have resources that extend far beyond what a simple rancher can match." After Charles and his men left to take rooms at the hotel in town, the house felt different, smaller, more vulnerable, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the threat that had just walked through their door. "Can he really do what he's threatening?" Weston asked as they sat around the kitchen table, trying to make sense of the legal labyrinth Charles had constructed. "I don't know. Probably, if he has the right lawyers and the right judge." Lila May's voice was tired, defeated in a way that cut Weston to the heart. "Money has a way of making even questionable legal arguments seem compelling. There has to be something we can do, some way to fight this." "With what?" "He's right about his resources versus ours. I don't have $50,000 to spend on lawyers, and neither do you. But you're not the same woman who left Charleston. You're not helpless or dependent. You have skills, purpose, people who care about you. None of which matters if the law says I belong to Charles Whitmore." Emma appeared in the doorway, still clutching Rosie, her face streaked with tears. "Are you going to leave with the mean man?" The question shattered something in Lila May's chest. Looking at this child who had already lost one mother, who had learned to trust again only to face another abandonment, she felt rage building like a fire in her bones. "No," she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "No, I'm not going to leave with the mean man." "But he said the law." "The law is made by men, Emma, and men can be wrong." Lila May's eyes met Weston's across the table, seeing her own determination reflected there. "Charles made one crucial mistake. He still thinks I'm the broken woman he left behind in Charleston. He has no idea what I've become." "What have you become?" Weston asked softly. "Someone who fights back, someone who has found something worth protecting." She reached for his hand, drawing strength from the contact. "Charles wants a legal battle, then he'll get one. But it won't be the easy victory he's expecting." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of rain and change. The battle for Lila May's freedom was about to begin in earnest, and both sides would discover that some fights transform everyone involved, sometimes into something stronger, sometimes into something they never expected to become. But first, they had one night to prepare for a war that would determine not just Lila May's future, but the fate of the family they had built together in the healing space between loss and hope. The telegraph machine at the Granger station had been working overtime since dawn, its metallic tapping echoing through the small building like an urgent heartbeat. Messages flew between Texas and Charleston, between lawyers and judges, between allies and enemies, in a legal battle that was rapidly escalating beyond anyone's initial expectations. Weston stood beside the operator, watching as another response arrived from the attorney he had contacted in Austin. The news was not encouraging. Charles Whitmore had indeed engaged one of the most prestigious law firms in the South, and they were pursuing their case with the methodical precision of professionals who rarely lost. Mr. Graves. The telegraph operator, a thin man named Morrison who had been working the wires for 15 years, looked up from his machine with concern. "This message just came in from Austin. Seems urgent." Weston read the telegram twice, his jaw tightening with each word. The legal situation was worse than they had feared. Not only was Charles pursuing his claim through South Carolina courts, but he had also filed papers in federal court claiming that Lila May's presence in Texas constituted flight from lawful authority. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Lila May was conducting her own investigation into Charles's claims. Margaret had arrived early that morning with a collection of documents she had managed to obtain through her connections in Charleston: birth certificates, property records, and most importantly, a copy of her grandmother's actual will. "Look at this," Lila May said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table. "The original will makes no mention of the trust fund Charles described. The inheritance is modest, maybe $3,000, not $50,000. Margaret leaned closer, studying the legal language with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to trust men in expensive suits. "So where did he get the larger figure?" "I think he's lying about the amount to make the prize seem worth the effort. But Margaret, look at this clause here." Lila May pointed to a specific paragraph in the will. "It says the inheritance passes to me unconditionally upon my 21st birthday, which was 2 years ago. There's no mention of marriage or male guardianship, which means Charles has no legal claim to your money at all." "Exactly. But it also means he's gone to considerable trouble and expense to pursue a claim he knows is false." Lila May set down the document, her mind working through the implications. The question is why. Emma had been listening from her seat at the table, where she was supposed to be practicing her letters, but was far more interested in the adult drama unfolding around her. "Maybe he just wants to be mean to you because you didn't marry him." The simple observation carried more truth than the adults had considered. Sometimes the most complex schemes arose from the most basic motivations: wounded pride, the need to punish someone who had dared to reject them, the desire to prove that no one walked away from Charles Whitmore without consequences. "That's possible, sweetheart. Some people don't like it when they can't control others. Like when Johnny Phillips tried to make me give him my good pencil, and when I said no, he told the teacher I was being mean. Exactly like that. Except Charles is a grown man, which makes his behavior much worse." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Coleman returning with a larger group than before. Men this time, including Charles and his companions. "They're back," Margaret said grimly, "and they brought reinforcements." Weston arrived just as the group dismounted, his face grim with the news from town. He quickly pulled Lila May aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. "The federal court in Austin has issued a temporary restraining order. You're not allowed to leave the county until the hearing, which means you can't run, even if you wanted to." "I don't want to run." "There's more. Charles has also filed papers claiming that I'm holding you against your will and demanding your immediate release into his custody." The legal net was tightening with mechanical precision. Every move they made was being anticipated and countered by lawyers who had turned legal manipulation into an art form. Sheriff Coleman approached the house with obvious reluctance, his hat in his hands and his expression apologetic. "Folks, I'm sorry to be back so soon, but I've got more papers to serve." "What now?" Weston's voice was carefully controlled, but Lila May could see the tension in his shoulders. "Court order requiring Miss Walker to be held in protective custody pending the hearing. Either she comes with me to the jail in town, or," he paused, clearly uncomfortable with his instructions, "or I'm authorized to deputize Mr. Whitmore's men to ensure her safety." The choice was no choice. At either Lila May would be imprisoned in the town jail, or she would be guarded by Charles's hired thugs. Either way, she would be separated from Weston and Emma, isolated and vulnerable. "Sheriff," Lila May said quietly, "may I ask who requested this protective custody order?" "Mr. Whitmore's attorneys. They claim you're in danger from coercive influences that might prevent you from testifying freely." "I see. And did anyone ask me if I felt I was in danger?" Coleman's discomfort was obvious. "Ma'am, I'm just following court orders. I don't make the law, I just enforce it." Charles stepped forward then, his smile triumphant. "My dear Lila May, surely you can see that this is all for your own protection. These people have obviously exerted undue influence over you, convinced you to abandon your true obligations. A few days in town, away from their manipulation, will help clear your thoughts." "My thoughts are perfectly clear, thank you." "Are they? Because from where I stand, it appears you've been living in sin with a man who isn't your husband, neglecting your legal obligations, and teaching his child to call you mother when you have no right to that title." The accusation hit Emma like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, and she pressed closer to Lila May's side. "She is like my mama. She takes care of me and teaches me things and loves me. I'm sure she's very fond of you, child, but fondness isn't the same as family. Your real mother is dead, and this woman is simply a temporary substitute until more appropriate arrangements can be made." The cruelty of the words, delivered with calculated precision in front of a grieving child, revealed more about Charles's character than any legal document could. Weston stepped forward, his control finally slipping. "That's enough. You want to pursue your legal claims. Fine, but you will not speak that way to my daughter in my house." "Your house?" Charles's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I think you'll find that once Miss Walker and I are properly married, community property laws will give me a substantial interest in your ranch as well. After all, she's been contributing to its operation, hasn't she? Her labor and my wife's assets will represent a considerable investment in this property." The threat was clear. Charles wasn't just after Lila May's inheritance. He was positioning himself to claim part of the Rocking G Ranch as well, using marriage law and property rights to strip away everything Weston had built. "You can't do that," Emma said, her voice small but defiant. "This is our home. Child, you'll learn that adults don't always get to keep the things they think belong to them. Sometimes circumstances change, and we have to adapt." Margaret, who had been silent through most of the exchange, finally reached her limit. "Charles Whitmore, you are a despicable excuse for a man. What you're doing isn't law, it's extortion. Miss Graves, I suggest you be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Slander is also a legal offense." Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Folks, I need an answer. Miss Walker comes with me voluntarily, or I start deputizing additional men to ensure compliance with the court order." Lila May looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. Emma's tear-streaked cheeks, Margaret's righteous anger, Weston's barely controlled fury. The choice was between submission and separation, between legal compliance and moral resistance. "Sheriff, I'll come with you voluntarily, but I want it noted that I'm doing so under protest and that I consider this entire proceeding to be a miscarriage of justice." "Yes, ma'am. I'll make note of that." As she gathered a few belongings for her stay in town, Weston caught her hand. "We're not giving up. I'm riding to Austin tonight to meet with our lawyer. We'll find a way to fight this. And if you can't, then we'll find another way. I'm not losing you, Lila May. Not to him, not to anyone." Emma threw her arms around Lila May's waist, clinging with the desperation of a child facing another abandonment. "Please don't let them take you away. Remember what I told you about friends, sweetheart. No matter where I am, no matter what happens, I will always be your friend." And friends find their way back to each other. As the group prepared to leave for town, none of them could have predicted that the events of the next 24 hours would expose truths that would change everything about Charles's real motivations, about the law's limitations, about the power of community when it finally decides to take a stand. The storm that had been gathering for weeks was about to break, and when it did, everyone involved would discover that some battles are won, not in courtrooms, but in the hearts of people who refuse to let justice be perverted by those with more money than morals. The Granger courthouse had never hosted a legal proceeding quite like this one. Word had spread through the community about the elegant Charleston gentleman trying to force a local woman back to South Carolina against her will, and by the time Judge Harrison called the emergency hearing to order, Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. Judge Harrison was a fair man, weathered by 30 years of frontier justice, who had little patience for legal theatrics, but deep respect for the law's intention to protect the vulnerable. He studied the papers before him with the careful attention of someone who understood that his decision would ripple far beyond this courtroom. This is a hearing to determine the legal status of Miss Lila Mae Walker and the validity of claims made regarding her obligations under South Carolina law, he announced. Mr. Whitmore, you're the petitioner. Present your case. Charles rose with the practiced elegance of a man accustomed to commanding attention in courtrooms. His attorney, a sharp-featured man named Blackwood, who had arrived from Austin with an impressive collection of legal precedents, spread documents across the table with theatrical precision. Your Honor, this case is quite straightforward. Miss Walker entered into a legally binding engagement with my client under South Carolina law. This engagement was never formally dissolved, making her departure from Charleston a breach of legal obligation. We ask the court to order her immediate return to South Carolina to honor her commitments. Miss Walker, Judge Harrison said, turning to where Lila Mae sat beside the local attorney Weston had hired, a competent man named Samuel Porter. How do you respond to these claims? Lila Mae rose with the dignity that had carried her through months of hardship and transformation. Your Honor, I was engaged to Mr. Whitmore, but that engagement was terminated by mutual understanding after I was injured in a fire. Mr. Whitmore made it clear that he no longer wished to marry me, and I accepted his decision. Do you have documentation of this dissolution? No, Your Honor. It was handled as a matter of honor between gentlemen, so I thought. Blackwood seized on this admission immediately. Your Honor, without written dissolution, the engagement remains legally binding under South Carolina Statute 1847-23, which requires formal documentation for the termination of announced betrothals involving the exchange of valuable consideration. Judge Harrison frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the legal technicality being used to trap a woman in an unwanted obligation. Mr. Whitmore, why didn't you formalize the dissolution at the time if you no longer wished to marry Miss Walker? Charles's answer was smooth, practiced. Your Honor, I was devastated by Miss Walker's injury and not thinking clearly about legal formalities. I deeply regret any confusion my emotional state may have caused. I never intended to release her from our engagement, quite the opposite. I've spent considerable time and expense trying to locate her so we could proceed with our marriage plans. It was a masterful performance, delivered with just the right combination of regret and determination. Several people in the courtroom nodded sympathetically, seeing a devoted fiancé pursuing his lost love. Miss Walker, Judge Harrison said, what is your response to Mr. Whitmore's claim that he never intended to end the engagement? Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore visited me exactly once after my accident. During that visit, he informed me that he could not marry a woman who could never walk, never bear children normally, never fulfill the duties of a proper wife. He said our engagement had been a mistake and that he was releasing me from any obligation to him. That's not how I remember the conversation. Charles interjected smoothly. Miss Walker was heavily medicated at the time, and I fear her memory of our discussion has been clouded by her trauma and subsequent experiences. The accusation that her memory was unreliable due to medication and trauma was legally clever. It provided a plausible explanation for conflicting accounts while positioning Charles as the more credible witness. Mr. Porter, Judge Harrison said, do you have any evidence to support Miss Walker's version of events? Porter stood, pulling out a document that made Charles's confident expression falter slightly. Your Honor, I have here a report from the Charleston Fire Department regarding the incident that injured Miss Walker. The report includes witness statements about Miss Walker's heroic actions in trying to save the lives of servants trapped in the fire. Objection, Blackwood said quickly. The fire report has no bearing on the legal status of the engagement. It has bearing on Miss Walker's character, Your Honor, Porter replied. Mr. Whitmore claims he is pursuing this engagement out of love and devotion. But the fire report reveals that Miss Walker was injured while risking her life to save other Shardley, the actions of someone unstable or unreliable. Judge Harrison accepted the document, reading through it with interest. This report indicates that Miss Walker saved the lives of 3 people before the beam collapsed on her. Quite heroic. Furthermore, Porter continued, I have here a letter from Dr. Marcus Henley, Miss Walker's physician in Charleston, attesting to her complete mental faculties both during and after her recovery. At no time was she too heavily medicated to understand conversations or make rational decisions. Charles's mask slipped slightly as he realized his strategy of questioning Lila May's credibility was backfiring. Your Honor, Miss Walker's actions during the fire were indeed admirable, but they don't change the legal reality of our engagement. Perhaps not, Judge Harrison said, but they do establish her character. Mr. Whitmore, I have to ask, if you were so devoted to Miss Walker, why did you wait months to pursue her? Why not travel to Texas immediately when you discovered her whereabouts? The question caught Charles off guard. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. I was trying to resolve the matter through proper legal channels first, Your Honor. I believed she had been misled about the legality of her departure. Or, Porter interjected, perhaps Mr. Whitmore only became interested in pursuing Miss Walker after learning about her grandmother's inheritance. Objection! Blackwood was on his feet immediately. There's no evidence to support such speculation. Actually, Your Honor, there is. Porter produced another document. This is a copy of Miss Walker's grandmother's will, obtained from the Charleston probate court. It clearly states that Miss Walker inherited $3,000 unconditionally upon her 21st birthday. Mr. Whitmore has been claiming the inheritance is worth $50,000, a claim that appears to be entirely fabricated. The revelation sent murmurs through the courtroom. Charles's face flushed with anger at having his deception exposed so publicly. Furthermore, Porter continued, we have evidence that Mr. Whitmore has been making inquiries about property values and mineral rights in the area where Miss Walker currently resides. It appears his interest extends beyond romantic reunion to include potential claims on Texas property. Judge Harrison's expression grew stern as he studied the documentation. Mr. Whitmore, these allegations suggest your motivations may not be as pure as you've represented. Would you care to explain the discrepancy regarding the inheritance amount? Charles's attorney whispered urgently in his ear before he answered, Your Honor, there may have been confusion regarding the current value of the inherited assets. Property values have fluctuated considerably in recent years. A confusion that conveniently inflated the value by more than 1,500%. The hearing was taking a decidedly negative turn for Charles, but he wasn't finished. With the desperation of a man seeing his carefully constructed plan crumbling, he played his final card. Your Honor, regardless of financial considerations, the fact remains that Miss Walker is legally bound to me under South Carolina law. More importantly, she has been living in sin with Mr. Graves, compromising her virtue and violating the moral standards that society requires of engaged women. The accusation hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. It was a direct attack not just on Lila May's legal status, but on her character and reputation, the kind of charge that could destroy a woman's standing in the community regardless of the legal outcome. Judge Harrison's voice was ice-cold. Mr. Whitmore, that is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence to support it? She has been living in his house, caring for his child, acting as his wife in all but name. The implication is clear. From the back of the courtroom, a voice rang out strong and clear. That's a lie. All eyes turned to see Emma Graves standing on a chair, her small voice carrying with surprising authority. Lila May has her own room, and Papa has his own room, and I have my own room. She teaches me lessons and makes breakfast and helps with the books, but she doesn't do anything wrong. Emma, Weston said gently, trying to get his daughter to sit down. But Emma wasn't finished. And Mr. Whitmore is a mean man who said I'm not really Papa's daughter and that Lila May isn't really my friend. But she is my friend, and friends don't let mean people tell lies about each other. The simple honesty of a child's testimony carried more weight than any legal document. Judge Harrison looked at Emma with something approaching a smile. "Young lady, you're very brave to speak up for your friend." The hearing was far from over, but the tide had clearly turned. Charles's credibility was in tatters, his motivations exposed as mercenary rather than romantic, his accusations revealed as desperate attempts to salvage a failing case. But as Porter prepared his closing arguments, none of them could have predicted that Charles had one more card to play on that would transform this legal proceeding into something far more dangerous. The tension in the courtroom had reached a breaking point when Charles rose from his seat with the desperate fury of a man watching his carefully constructed scheme collapse. His lawyer tried to restrain him, but Charles shook off Blackwood's restraining hand with violent force. "Your Honor, I demand justice." Charles's voice cracked with barely controlled rage. "This woman has made a mockery of our legal system, of the sacred institution of marriage, and of the honor of South Carolina itself." Judge Harrison's gavel came down sharply. "Mr. Whitmore, you will control yourself or be removed from my courtroom." "Control myself? While this crippled charlatan destroys everything decent and proper?" Charles's mask of genteel respectability had completely fallen away, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "She was ruined goods when I graciously offered to marry her anyway, and now she repays my generosity by fleeing like a common criminal." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Even Charles's own attorney looked appalled at his client's public breakdown. But Emma Graves had heard enough. The 7-year-old girl stood up on her chair again, her child's voice carrying with crystal clarity through the suddenly silent room. "You're the mean man who makes ladies cry," she declared, pointing directly at Charles. "And you can't have my Lila May because she belongs with us." Charles whirled toward Emma with such sudden violence that several people in the courtroom stood up in alarm. "You insolent brat! You have no understanding of adult matters." "I understand that you're a bad man," Emma said, her chin trembling but her voice steady, "and I drew a picture to prove it." From her small reticule, Emma pulled out a folded piece of paper. With the solemnity of someone presenting crucial evidence, she handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Harrison. The drawing was simple but devastating in its childish honesty. It showed 3 figures standing together in front of a house, a tall man with kind eyes, a woman in a cart with a gentle smile, and a small girl holding their hands. In the corner, separated by a harsh black line, stood another figure with angry scribbles for a face and what appeared to be bags of money clutched in his hands. "This is my real family," Emma explained to the silent courtroom. "Papa and Lila May and me. We take care of each other and love each other and make music together. The mean man in the corner just wants to take things that don't belong to him." Judge Harrison studied the drawing with the gravity of someone examining critical evidence. "Young lady, why did you draw the man with money?" "Because that's all he talks about, money and laws, and taking Lila May away from people who love her. Mama used to say that people who only think about money don't have room in their hearts for love." The simple wisdom of Sarah Graves, spoken through her daughter's innocent voice, struck the courtroom like a physical blow. Even hardened ranchers who had come to watch the proceedings found themselves wiping their eyes. Margaret Graves, who had been sitting quietly in the back, suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, I have something to confess." All eyes turned to her as she walked forward, with the determined air of someone about to right a terrible wrong. "I was the one who placed the mail-order bride advertisement that brought Lila May to Texas. I forged the correspondence and deceived them both. But watching what Mr. Whitmore is trying to do to these good people, I can't stay silent anymore." "Miss Graves," Judge Harrison said carefully, "what is your point?" "My point is that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. I broke the law when I forged those letters, but I helped create something beautiful, a family, a home, love, where there was only loneliness before. Mr. Whitmore is using the law to try to destroy something good for his own selfish gain." That's very moving, Miss Graves, but legal obligations don't disappear because of sentiment. Maybe not, Margaret replied, but truth has a way of coming out eventually. And the truth is that Charles Whitmore abandoned Lila May when she needed him most, and now he wants to use legal technicalities to steal her life and her happiness. Charles, his face purple with rage, turned on Margaret with vicious fury. You meddling spinster! You have no right to interfere in matters between your betters. The insult was one step too far. Weston rose from his seat with the deadly calm of a man who had reached his limit. Mr. Whitmore. Weston's voice was quiet, but carried the promise of violence. You will apologize to my sister immediately, or I'll escort you outside and teach you some manners the hard way. You dare threaten me, I'll have you arrested for assault. I'm not threatening you, I'm making you a promise. Judge Harrison's gavel came down repeatedly as he tried to restore order, but the courtroom was electric with tension. Charles's hired men were reaching for their weapons. The local ranchers were standing up in support of Weston, and Emma was still clutching her drawing with tears streaming down her face. It was Lila May who finally broke the standoff. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. "All of you, just stop." She maneuvered her cart to the center of the courtroom, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. When she spoke, her voice carried the dignity of someone who had found her strength in the crucible of adversity. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore, gentlemen of the court, you're all fighting about me as if I'm a piece of property to be claimed or a prize to be won. But I'm not. I'm a human being with the right to choose my own future." "The law says," Charles began. "The law says many things, Mr. Whitmore, but the law also says that contracts signed under duress are invalid, that fraud vitiates any agreement, that justice should protect the innocent, not enable the powerful to prey on the vulnerable." She turned to address Judge Harrison directly. "Your Honor, I was never Mr. Whitmore's legal property. Our engagement was dissolved when he made it clear he could no longer marry me. I came to Texas seeking a new life, and I found it. I found purpose, family, love, and dignity. I found people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide them. But the legal technicalities," Blackwood started to object, "are being used to pervert justice, not serve it." Lila May's voice grew stronger. "Mr. Whitmore doesn't love me. He never loved me. He sees me as a means to an end, a way to claim money he has no right to and property he hasn't earned. This entire proceeding is based on lies, manipulation, and legal abuse." Charles made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Your Honor, regardless of Miss Walker's pretty speeches, the law is clear." "The law is clear," Judge Harrison interrupted, his patience finally exhausted. "And what's clear is that you've wasted this court's time with a frivolous claim based on fabricated evidence and fraudulent representations." The judge's voice carried the authority of 3 decades of frontier justice. "Mr. Whitmore, your claim that Miss Walker is bound to you by an unresolved engagement might have technical merit, but your credibility has been so thoroughly destroyed that I question every aspect of your testimony. Your inflated claims about her inheritance, your threats against her current household, and your abusive treatment of a child in my courtroom all suggest that your motivations are far from honorable. Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "Miss Walker's current living arrangements appear to be entirely proper and beneficial to all parties involved. She has meaningful work, a safe home, and the respect of her community. To force her to return to South Carolina against her will would constitute a miscarriage of justice that I will not sanction." Charles's face went white as he realized the magnitude of his defeat. "You can't do this. I have rights, legal precedent. Mr. Whitmore, you have the right to appeal my decision through proper channels. You do not have the right to continue disrupting this community or threatening these good people." Judge Harrison's gavel came down with finality. "I hereby dismiss your petition and order that Miss Walker be free to remain in Texas or go wherever she chooses without interference from you or your representatives." The courtroom erupted in cheers, but the celebration was short-lived. "Charles," His face, twisted with fury and humiliation, turned toward his hired gunman with a look that promised violence. "If the law won't give me what's mine," he snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear, "then I'll take it another way." The threat hung in the air like thunder before a storm, and everyone in the courtroom understood that Charles Whitmore's legal defeat had only transformed him into something far more dangerous, a desperate man with nothing left to lose and the resources to cause considerable harm before he was stopped. The battle for Leela May's freedom had been won in the courtroom, but the war for her safety was just beginning. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning that painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and azure, Leela May Walker became Leela May Graves in a ceremony that transformed the front yard of the Rocking G Ranch into something approaching paradise. The simple gold band that Weston placed on her finger carried more weight than all the diamonds and emeralds that Charleston society had ever displayed, because it represented choice, freely made, and love, freely given. Emma stood beside them as their witness, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself and wearing a dress that Leela May had sewn from fabric they had chosen together in town. The little girl's smile was bright enough to rival the autumn sun, her joy infectious as she watched the two people she loved most in the world promise to love each other forever. "Do you, Weston Thomas Graves, take Leela May Walker to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Weston said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Leela May's face. "I promise to stand beside her, not above her, to support her dreams, not limit them. To love her not because she needs me, but because she chooses me." "And do you, Leela May Walker, take Weston Thomas Graves to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Leela May replied, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had finally found where she belonged. "I promise to build our life together as equal partners. To bring all of myself to our marriage, my strength and my limitations, my past and my future, my heart and my hopes." The minister, a kind man who had traveled from Austin specifically for this ceremony, smiled at the unconventional vows that spoke more to partnership than traditional matrimony. "By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Weston, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Emma threw her wildflowers into the air with a whoop of joy that set the tone for the celebration that followed. Margaret had outdone herself with the wedding feast, transforming the ranch house into a showcase of frontier hospitality. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the ranch garden, and pies that had been cooling since dawn. Neighbors from miles around had come to celebrate, bringing their own contributions and their genuine affection for a couple whose love story had become legendary in the area. Sheriff Coleman approached the newlyweds during the reception, his hat in his hands and his expression serious. "Weston, Leela May, I wanted to give you an update on the Whitmore situation." Charles had indeed attempted to make good on his threat after the court hearing. 3 days later, he and his hired men had tried to ambush Leela May during her weekly trip to town. But they had underestimated the protective instincts of a community that had adopted her as one of their own. Jake Peterson and 2 other ranch hands had been discreetly following at a distance, and the attempted kidnapping had ended with Charles and his men in jail and a federal warrant issued for their arrest. "He's been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for attempted kidnapping and crossing state lines to commit a felony," Coleman reported. His lawyers tried to argue it was just an enthusiastic pursuit of a legal claim, but the judge wasn't buying it. Charles Whitmore won't be bothering anyone for a long time. The news was like lifting a weight from their shoulders. For months, they had lived with the knowledge that Charles was still out there, still plotting, still dangerous. Now they could truly move forward without looking over their shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff," Leela May said, "for everything you did to protect us." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Besides, this community looks after its own. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Lila May found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a broken woman with no future, shipped west like damaged goods in hope of finding someone desperate enough to take her. Now she was surrounded by people who loved her, married to a man who respected her, and helping to raise a daughter who called her Mama with genuine affection. Emma had indeed started calling her Mama about a month after the court hearing. It had happened naturally, without discussion or formal decision. One morning at breakfast, Emma had simply said, "Mama, can you help me with my arithmetic?" And Lila May had answered as if she had been waiting her whole life to hear that word. "Are you happy?" Weston asked as they watched Emma teaching some of the other children how to play a game she had invented, involving wildflowers and storytelling. "I'm more than happy," Lila May replied, leaning against his shoulder with contentment that ran bone deep. "I'm home." The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Lila May's organizational skills and Weston's ranching expertise had proven to be a formidable combination. The books were immaculate, the cattle were thriving, and they had even begun expanding their operations to include a small trading post that served the growing number of settlers in the area. But more than financial success, they had created something that couldn't be measured in dollars or a Creaser family, built on choice rather than obligation, love rather than convenience, respect rather than dominance. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that rivaled any Charleston sunset Lila May had ever seen, the guests began to disperse. Children were loaded into wagons, despite their protests that the party should continue forever. Adults exchanged final congratulations and promises to visit soon. Margaret was among the last to leave, having supervised the cleanup with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. She hugged Lila May tightly, tears in her eyes. "I'm so glad I meddled," she whispered. "I know it was wrong, but I can't regret something that brought so much happiness." "Sometimes the wrong thing for the right reasons turns out to be exactly what everyone needed," Lila May replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to interfere." As the final wagon disappeared down the road, the three of them stood on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Emma was between them, holding both their hands, her small body warm against Lila May's side. "Are we really a family now?" Emma asked, though she knew the answer. "We've been a family for months, sweetheart," Lila May said gently. "The wedding just made it official." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "I like being official." Later, after Emma had been tucked into bed with Rosie and a promise of pancakes for breakfast, Weston and Lila May sat on their porch in the comfortable silence of people who had found their place in the world. "Do you ever think about Charleston?" Weston asked. "About the life you left behind?" Lila May considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but not with regret. That life belonged to someone else, someone who thought happiness meant security and status. I was never really whole there, just playing a role I thought I was supposed to want. And now I know what it feels like to be truly myself, to be valued for who I am rather than what I represent, to build something meaningful with someone who sees me as an equal partner." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of gratitude. "You gave me back my life, Weston. Not by rescuing me, but by letting me rescue myself." "We rescued each other," he said quietly. "Emma and I were just existing before you came. You taught us how to live again." The conversation was interrupted by the soft sound of piano music drifting from the house. Emma, who was supposed to be asleep, was playing one of the lullabies Lila May had taught her, something gentle and sweet that spoke of home and safety and love that lasted. "Should we tell her to go to bed?" Weston asked. "In a few minutes," Lila May replied, listening to the simple melody that had become the soundtrack of their evening routine. Some music is too beautiful to interrupt. As they listened to their daughter play songs of home and family, Lila May thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fire that had taken so much but ultimately led her to everything she had ever really wanted. She thought about the broken bride who had arrived in Texas with nothing but hope and determination, and marveled at how much strength could grow from the ashes of loss. The music stopped, replaced by the soft sound of small feet hurrying back to bed before the adults could discover her midnight concert. Weston and Lila May smiled at each other, understanding without words that some rules were worth bending for the sake of joy. "Ready to start our life together, officially, Mrs. Graves?" Weston asked, offering her his arm as they prepared to go inside. "I've been ready since the day I chose to stay," she replied, taking his arm with the confidence of a woman who had learned that the best futures are built by people brave enough to choose love over safety, hope over fear, and partnership over protection. Together, they walked into their homey place, made sacred not by grand architecture or expensive furnishings, but by the presence of people who had chosen to love each other through whatever storms might come. And in the gentle Texas night, with stars overhead and music in their hearts, they began the first evening of the rest of their lives together, knowing that some journeys end exactly where they were always meant to begin.